Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to give you your weekly forecast of June 10th through the 16th. As always, let's start with a little recap of what last week brought us and how that leads us into the week ahead. So last week was a packed week. We had the Venus-Sun conjunction, Cazimi, in Gemini, and we had the new moon in Gemini as well. So it's important to understand that these two events, while they may happen, right? A new moon in Gemini we get every year. A Venus Cazimi, it has happened in the past. It is unlike any other event in this sign that we've had before because of everything happening around it, right? We have that Jupiter in Gemini that hasn't been there in 12 years. We have that Pluto retrograde in Aquarius, which has been creating contact to all of that Gemini energy. And really, it's an invitation to revolutionize the way that we think, the way that we perceive ourselves. And I genuinely believe that it has so much to do with what we believe is possible for ourselves and for our lives. Okay. So as we move into the week of the 10th, we are still being supported by this energy. I mean, this energy is brand new. It's going to last for several weeks. And beyond that, remember, a new moon opens up a 6-month energetic cycle that will end with the full moon in Gemini of December. So whatever it is that we are starting right now, whether it's we're actually planting the seed for something, or we are, thinking about something, we're planting a seed, whether we're doing something about it or not. We're planting a seed with our thoughts, with the current perception that we have of ourselves and what we believe ourselves capable of. And that Venus Cazimi goes from, Venus conjoining with the sun to, again, when Venus will conjoin with the sun during a Venus retrograde, which will be a Venus retrograde in Aries. I don't remember the exact dates, but it's probably going to be around March or April of 2025. So here we have really a span of 9 months in which we are being asked, where do you need to change your mind about the way that, again, you perceive yourself? And how does that shift the perspective that you have of the world that you live in, the perspective of what's possible for you, and how do you move forward with that? So the week ahead of June 10th through the 16th, I feel that it has several different components because Mercury is actually quite active. And I think what I'm going to do in this particular forecast is really lay out the metaphysical meaning behind all of this, the very practical meaning around all of this, and the psychological meaning around all of this, right? How does that work in our heads? What might that look like in the conversations that we're having? So with all of that said, let's get started. Monday, June 10th, we have Mercury and Gemini create a trine to the South Node in Libra and therefore a sextile to the North Node in Aries. All of this happening at 14 degrees of each one of those signs. So when we're talking about how this might manifest in our practical lives, I think that first, this is a week because of that connection to Mercury, which is, again, the planet of cognitive thought, communication, which is phone calls, texts, emails, communicating with one another on a daily basis, connecting with the nodes. This is a beautiful week for potentially receiving an answer on something, an offer on something. There's a potential manifestation of something that you have either really been thinking about and moving forward with, or something that's been in the talks, right? One of the things that I've noticed with the emphasis of Gemini energy is that even though we are not in any kind of retrograde right now, we're in a Pluto retrograde, but not anything that affects us truly personally on a daily basis, is that the energy has felt a little Mercury retrograde. And I think that it has been because Gemini energy is very fast moving. We moved from an emphasis in Taurus energy, which moves very slowly, into Gemini energy, which is very rushed, right? Or at least it can feel that way. And so there can be like a cross in communication Well, Monday, with Mercury in Gemini at 14 degrees, creating a trine to the South Node in Libra, to me, in a practical way, again, can represent receiving a call, receiving an email, having a conversation about something that settles. And the South Node in Libra there is an indicator that we are breaking away with something else. We are breaking away either with a particular relationship to someone or something, or there is a renewal of a particular relationship with someone or something. I think that the North Node in Aries there, the sextile between Mercury and Gemini to the North Node in Aries, is there has to be a willingness to look at things differently, to do things differently, to kind of pioneer and not be afraid of where something might take you. Now, on a mindset perspective, I think this has a lot to do with you thinking about, or at least it's an invitation, which is what I've noticed. It's an invitation to you really becoming mindful of your thoughts, of your internal narrative, again, of what you believe is possible for you. And a Mercury in Gemini is the ability, especially with a trine to the South Node in Libra, to air signs that can very much weigh the two sides of something, right? That's much more Libra, but in true Gemini fashion, there is an understanding that there is another way of looking at something. So if there's another way of looking at something, there's an initial way that we are looking at something. And so this is an invitation to really take stock or into account, what are my thoughts? How am I speaking to myself? How am I really thinking about my life and the world that I live in, and do I like it? I think that so much of this Gemini energy is an invitation, especially with a North Node in Aries, to give ourselves permission to think about and be who we want to be. Okay, so here's what I mean by this. Let's say that last week or over the last 2 weeks, with all of that Gemini energy, the buildup to that new moon in Gemini, the buildup to that Venus in Gemini Cazimi, was so much about I see the potential, I see where this can go. And then somehow feeling like you aren't allowed to have something, or others can, but you can't, or should I be asking for that? Should I be thinking that? Am I allowed to have this or not? Some of the conversations that I've had and some of the things that I've even noticed within myself is having those conversations, having those internal dialogues, particularly, and recognizing that you are really the only one who can give yourself permission to think what you want to think. Because essentially, Gemini to me feels like the reminder that your thoughts actually do create your reality. And so this is where I go into the metaphysical aspect of all of this, which notice what your thoughts about yourself and about your life, notice where they are landing you right now. Because as much as that new moon in Gemini and that Venus Cazimi really represent the beginning of something new, the beginning of something new comes with the understanding that the old has to change, right? So there is, in essence, a manifestation there that happens. And the manifestation is, where am I sitting in my life right now? And do I like it, right? In the simplest terms. Now, let's be mindful here. This isn't a time, and this isn't a call or an invitation to say I suck, to say I should have thought better thoughts, I should have made better decisions. Why am I still in this place? This isn't about beating yourself up. This is about looking at where you are and deciding, okay, this is what my thoughts thus far, this is where they have led me, this is what they have taught me, and this is what I would like to change. And the North Node in Aries, in combination with Mercury and Gemini there, while Mercury is passing all of the magic happening in its home sign of Gemini, it's the understanding that when I change my thoughts, again, I change my reality, that I can do, be, and have anything that I want. And I can, I'm an internal optimist, but not because Not because life has always been easy, but because life has shown me a lot of tough lessons, I'm sure, as a lot of you out there. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, am I going to continue being defined by the hardships of my life, or am I going to appreciate them for what they taught me and choose to live differently? And that's the thing with air signs, is that they present us with the opportunity to choose. And so when we look at the nodes here, anything having with the nodes has to do with a soul lesson that we came into this lifetime to learn. And so here is, what are my thoughts about myself, my narratives, expansive or limiting? What are they teaching me about what my life is reflecting back to me? And I think that this is important to understand, because we are upgrading. If the astrology shows us that there is an upgrade of technology happening in worldwide, right? That is on its way, that it's already here. For instance, with AI, the astrology also shows us that there is a leveling up of technology in our minds. And so here I'm talking about like things around like very Joe Dispenza-ish, right? Very much about understanding that when you go to that place and you visualize certain things and you spend enough time there and you create a relationship with the feeling that is there, that creates and moves mountains. So I think that this is really interesting, because whatever we're seeing in our practical everyday life is reflecting something back to us that is informing us of where we want to and where we don't want to be. And the question then becomes, what do we want to do about it? Tuesday, June 11th, we have Mars in Taurus create a square to Pluto retrograde in Aquarius at 2 degrees. So at a very practical level, this can present itself as very slow moving energy. So let's say that you are someone who works out every day. You're going to perhaps notice that your movements perhaps want to be a little slower, right? To me, a Mars in Taurus is very strong, very steady. But the block or the square to Pluto in Aquarius can represent a little bit of a struggle. And so this to me feels very slow movement, heavy weight lifting, very strategic, very present type of energy. When it comes to the everyday movement, it's a great day to focus on something that requires your undivided attention, that you are not trying to fill your calendar with 10, 15 things in one day, because again, that's slow energy. It's fixed energy with Taurus and Aquarius. You might not get through it, and it can create a sense of frustration within yourself. Just know that maybe that's just not the day, or maybe it's just not the week to do all of the things at once. It's really great energy for focused energy. I think that on a collective level, this might really present itself as a power struggle, between the collective, and the powers that be. So it'll be an interesting week to watch the news. If this has to do anything with personal relationships, so remember, Mercury in Gemini is very active right now. And on Monday, we have that Mercury in Gemini trine the South Node in Libra. That can actually present an opportunity to have very healing conversations with someone if that's needed. But here's the thing, that Mars square Pluto can represent a power struggle between two people if things aren't clear, or if someone is unwilling to meet you halfway. So a Mars square Pluto can feel like being in a little bit like between a rock and a hard place, okay? At a personal level, at a mindset level, I think this can have a lot to do with, again, where do you feel stuck? Where do you feel like you're struggling? Where do you feel like things are moving slower, Mars and Taurus, than you wish they were? A Pluto retrograde in Aquarius is the invitation to really take in that which we're visualizing for the future and ask ourselves, is that something that I really want? And if it is, okay, if it's something that I really want and I am consistent and connected to the potential outcome of this, what is the hurry? Because the best way to take advantage of a Mars in Taurus square Pluto in Aquarius is to remain steady, to trust the pace at which things are happening at, right? And this takes me to the metaphysical interpretation of all of this. Trust divine timing. You are not late. You are not forgotten about. You are exactly where you are meant to be at this moment in time. So if things are seemingly moving slower than you would like, the question is not so much why aren't things moving faster, is what am I supposed to be learning right now? What is Mars and Taurus trying to teach me right now? Mars and Taurus is about strategy. It's about minding every single step. It's about a surety in the self, right? Mars and Taurus is actually quite like the energy and the essence of that placement is very confident. Is I don't need to rush in such a Martian way. No, I can take my time. I don't have to be anxious because I know that what is meant for me is coming. I know that I'm aligning. So the square and the, again, the slower pace of it all is the invitation of how do you continue in a metaphysical way? How do you continue to sharpen, to define, to fine tune the connection, the energetic connection from where you are to where you want to be? This is where Pluto goes from feeling something that overpowers you, where you might ask yourself, what the is happening? Why aren't things turning out for me? To feeling empowered by the way that things are turning out because you're asking yourself different questions. Don't forget that all of this Gemini energy in the air is about what if you looked at things differently? And if this Mars Pluto square is presenting resistance or what feels like an impediment, what are you being asked to, how are you being asked to look at things differently? Very interesting stuff here. Wednesday, June 12th, we have Mercury in action again. So Mercury and Gemini creating a square to Saturn and Pisces at 19 degrees. So the practical interpretation and potential manifestation of this can mean, again, a sense of feeling something is not being communicated clearly between you and someone else. So this can manifest in an inability to perhaps meet halfway, an inability to see each other's points of views. This is perhaps, let's say that you're signing a contract. So earlier in the week, we have this opportunity of something coming through with Mercury connecting to the nodes. But the square to Saturn, I feel, let's say that you get an offer and you have to sign a contract, you have to look at some documents, really read through things very carefully, have another set of eyes look into it. Saturn in the zodiac represents the energy of an expert. So if you are not an expert at something, perhaps hire an expert who can look, at this, at a contract for you, or at a lease for you. This is the opportunity to also set things very straight. Let's say that you are in terms of negotiating right now. If you are someone who's negotiating in the middle of a negotiation right now, this might not be the week where it actually comes through, but it is a week where you're probably met with some resistance of something that you have requested, of something that you would like to see in a dynamic or in a contract. That's okay. Just keep moving along the way, because these squares, anytime we have a square in the zodiac, they get a really bad rap. They're known as like just aspects of tension, and they're horrible, and they're meant to destroy our lives. But it's not. Anytime we have a square, it is the cosmos inviting us to fine-tune something. It is something that creates enough pressure for something much more clear to come out, in the end of whatever is happening. So don't get too bogged down by squares. I think squares, whenever I see a lot of squares in a person's chart, First of all, I know that person's been through some stuff, and it's a person who can really carry themselves through this life without being easily intimidated by much. Okay. Now, from a mindset perspective, this can be, where am I stuck? So here's the perfect example. I have a client who sent me a message and said, look, I have been looking for jobs, nothing is landing, but I can sense that there's something within me that is not allowing me to align. Beautiful. Beautiful, because there's enough awareness to understand, what am I missing here? So the square between between Mercury and Gemini to Saturn and Pisces is Mercury and Gemini. What are my thoughts? What are the actual thoughts, right? And perhaps this is the combination of Mercury and Saturn is really great combination for anything practical. So here's an exercise that can be helpful if you're experiencing some of this energy. Write down all of the thoughts that you have, Mercury and Gemini, that may be limiting, right? I feel that the universe has forgotten about me. I'm not smart enough, or whatever it is, whatever all of the limiting thoughts are. And in true Mercury and Gemini fashion, this isn't about judging yourself. You're simply collecting data from up here. That's all that's happening. You're collecting data that is roaming around in your mind, and you're writing it down, and you're taking some distance and space from it, which can actually bring some clarity. Okay. So with that exercise, the square to Saturn and Pisces is questions like, how does this bring me more challenges than is necessary, right? How does this hinder me more than is necessary? How does this actually create a block, right? Or in true Saturn fashion is, okay, what do I need to fine tune? What do I need to master? What do I need to spend a little bit more time in so that I can understand it better? Right? And Saturn and Pisces, remember, is the invitation to devote your something that feels in alignment with you. So while these two things may be at odds at one another, that contrast that's provided between Mercury and Saturn with a square is so that you can clear things up. Okay. Another, from a metaphysical perspective, I think that this is a great time to that list of limiting thoughts that you have from a metaphysical perspective and a metaphysical practice, a witchy practice, burn that paper. Like really create a little, find some time to create some time and space for yourself where you're going to journal, where you're going to be in this meditative, esoteric space for a little bit, and list those limiting thoughts. Okay, understand what they are, really distance yourself from it and ask, are these limiting thoughts my own, or are they judgments that I have internalized from what other people have reflected back to me? An example of that can be feeling like you are too much. Usually when people feel that they're too much, it's because somebody in their life has told them that they are. Okay. And it's like, well, are you, or are you just genuinely expressing yourself, right? And we internalize those things that dim us, that make us create certain belief systems about ourselves that are not true. So once you have done that, once you have understood what's roaming around in the head, burn the paper of limiting thoughts and send it out into the universe. This isn't something that has to live with us. We get to choose the type of mindset that we get to have, but we have to be active in it. Okay. We have to also remember Saturn and Pisces. Saturn is the planet of karma. So here we have a lot of karmic type energy this week. At the beginning of the week, it was with the nodes, but with the nodes, it has so much to do with what our soul came to learn in this lifetime. With Saturn, it is kind of like seeing the consequences of our actions, decisions, and thoughts in this 3D reality. So Saturn is much more about this tangible 3D reality. So this is yet again an invitation to check your thoughts, check the conversations that you're having with others. And in Saturn, in Pisces, Saturn is the taking the responsibility for the self. I am the only one responsible for how I see my world, my life, what I believe myself possible. And in Pisces is the connection to spirit. It's the connection to the oneness that exists within us that understands I get to create. And if I allow myself to nurture that knowing within myself, then my life can actually change. So the Mercury square Saturn aspect is active at the same time that Mercury is creating connections to other things, because there's still something happening with Mercury on June 13th, and I'll get to that in a second. But the fact that Mercury is having so much action in a week, to me, just tells me, oh, there's a shift. There's not just a shift in the collective greater consciousness happening, but that shift in the greater collective consciousness is actually affecting, the simple human mind. And it's time to meet those two. It's time to allow those two to come together and to work together and to begin to make the mind work for us instead of us working for the mind, because the mind is very, very heavily influenced by past experiences, by past stories, and by the things that we are, shown every single day, to a degree where we can't help but be influenced. So the square to Saturn is about, how are you taking responsibility for the information that you consume, for your mental health in this case, for the decisions that have led you here thus far. One more thing I'll say is that because Saturn is involved, please be very mindful of self-judgment. It's never about that. When we understand that we came into this world to learn that we are creators, to learn who we are at our core, at our essence, we understand that judgment isn't a part of that mix. Judgment is something that we were taught. Judgment is something that we were conditioned with in order to be controlled. Saturn is not the planet of judgment in the way that we think of it in our 3D collective, not at all. Saturn is actually the planet that empowers us by saying, how are you taking responsibility for this? Because to take responsibility for where we are is actually an immense amount of power. Again, we go back to the concept of we are the only ones that can give ourselves permission to go and be whatever we want to go and be. And so I find it really fascinating that Mercury and Gemini is having so much action to really big points and planets, because again, there's something happening here. There's something that is asking us to change the way that we look at ourselves, that we look at our lives, but it gets to happen slowly and steadily. Thursday, June 13th, we have the Sun in Gemini come together with Mercury and Gemini at 22 degrees. So again, Gemini in action. So whenever the Sun and Mercury come together, the Sun illuminates something. It brings to the surface something not that was unknown, because Mercury wasn't retrograde in Gemini. But it does have to do with the Mercury retrograde in Aries that we experienced in April. And so for those of you who follow astrology, you know that the last time that the Sun and Mercury met was April 11th, and they met in Aries while Mercury was retrograde in Aries. Do you remember April? Do you remember that whole mess? So now, after all of that, this is another time where the Sun and Gemini are meeting. To me, this feels like a few things. And again, from practical interpretation and potential manifestation of this is like receiving news about something, receiving like the final yes about something, especially because Mercury and the Sun are so closely linked right now to Venus and Jupiter. So this can actually bring about good news. This can bring like an aha moment, right? Because again, everything that Mercury has been doing earlier in the week, it really creates this space for us to wonder about bigger questions. And perhaps you have something in your mind, and then around Thursday and Friday, you have this light bulb moment of, oh, of course, that's what it is. That's who I need to reach out to, or this is the idea that I have, or this is what I'm going to share. A Sun-Mercury conjunction is also really great energy to convey something to someone. If you're someone who's selling, this is a great day to sell your products, for instance, right? Now, on a from a mindset perspective, again, this is about those light bulb moments and minding where your mind is. I think that as positive as a sun conjunction can be, because it illuminates something, it brings something, the sun illuminates what's there. So if you haven't been in the best mindset, the sun is going to illuminate that. And mind you, all of these energies, what's happening on Monday, what's happening on Wednesday, and then what's happening on Thursday, all of these energies are really together. It's just because I'm separating them day by day doesn't mean that these energies are strictly for those days. We do that, you know, in our human world because we like things that way. It brings a sense of order, but it's all one big energy mesh together that is asking us a lot of different big questions. And so with the sun coming together with Mercury, again, there is an illumination. There is something that we understand that we cannot escape about this is what I need to do. And what am I willing to do about it? Because especially with the connection to Saturn, earlier in the week, remember, there is a calling to take responsibility for something. One thing I forgot to mention that is important is that Saturn will always ask us to sacrifice something. And here's what I mean. Saturn is the planet of delayed gratification. Okay. So I have experienced some significant Saturn transits in which I had to prioritize things. So there was a time where I had to choose between I either want to live a certain lifestyle, I want to live a certain way, or I'm going to mind my finances and really invest in my mental health and in my coaching. And I have to tell you that for about 2 or 3 years, most of my income after meeting my, you know, my responsibilities as my rent, my bills, and all of those things went to mental health and coaching. I would not change that for the world. But there were a lot of other things that I didn't do. And I honestly, it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It just felt like a weighing of what's important to me. And in true Saturn fashion is what is something that is actually going to benefit me in the long run. With Thursday and the Sun-Mercury conjunction in Gemini, it can be this realization of, again, weighing the options and saying, this is what's best for me. From a metaphysical perspective, anytime that the sun comes together with any personal planet, there's something new there. So whenever we have a new moon, right, the sun coming together with the moon, we have that marks a new moon, and there is a new cycle that has started. The sun coming together with any personal planet, like it did with Venus last week and like it's doing with Mercury this week, we are starting a new cycle. Are you open to that? What are the intentions behind how you're moving into this new cycle? And really, where the sun is involved from a metaphysical perspective is how are we showing up? Because the sun in astrology represents the ego, right? The identity. How do I choose for this ego and for this identity to show up versus what is expected of this ego and this personality to show up in the world? And there's a choice there. And again, the reminder of depending on the choices that we make, there will be certain outcomes. And it's not so much about focusing on whether or not you're making the right or the wrong choice as much as it is how intentional am I being with it by being with myself in this present moment? By being with myself right now and asking, who am I right now? What is important to me right now? And again, the beautiful thing about Gemini energy is that it's not about thinking, about 10 years down the line. This isn't about what are your 3, 5, and 10-year goal plans. That's not what this is about. This is truly about being present moment to moment and choosing in those moments. Louise Hay's, one of Louise Hay's greatest teachings is that there is no more powerful moment than the now. And what that means is that, let's say that you're having a day, right? You're having a day where, because this tends to happen to me from time to time, and it used to happen to me quite often. I'm waking up and I already feel like the gray cloud of the gloom and doom of the negative thoughts, the negative self-talk, the judgment, all of that. I have done enough therapy to understand that I don't have to choose for that to be my reality for that day. Right? This isn't about bypassing, especially if you're someone who is in therapy or has some kind of counseling facilitator, which, by the way, I'm a spiritual coach. If anybody wants to work with me, I do a lot of like counseling type sessions. This is very much about understanding that that part of you does have a time and a place, once a week or once every other week with your therapist. But right now, in this moment, you get to choose what your thoughts are going to be, what you want your day to unfold. And there are some days where I've had to do that just once in the morning, and I go into journaling or I go into listening to, something that lifts my spirits, like teachings of Abraham Hicks or Dolores Cannon, to remind me of the greater purpose that it is this life. And sometimes I just have to do that once and I get myself into a good place. And sometimes I have to really do that 10 times throughout the day and choose and choose and choose again. Why? Because the only powerful moment that we have is the now, and the now is at any given moment. So there's a lot of power there that the sun brings to Mercury, this identity, this ego, and the mind. The weekend of Friday, Saturday, Sunday, June 14th, 15th, and 16th, I think it's all really encompassed by Venus and Gemini at 29 degrees Gemini, creating a square to Neptune in Pisces at 29 degrees Pisces. Okay, so the practical interpretation and potential manifestation, really great weekend. To spend with creatives. If you're a creative, great weekend to create, to go to, art shows, any markets that are exhibiting artists' work, spending time with friends that are just as creative as you. This is also great energy for deep, profound conversations around spirituality, around connecting with the people that you really feel are your soul people. And in Venus and Gemini, it is, a lot of interaction, a lot of interesting conversation. And in Neptune and Pisces is a lot of interesting conversations about soul things. It's a great weekend to do things like, sound bath meditations, to go to a really beautiful yoga class, spend time by water, by a lake, at the beach, in the ocean. Really beautiful energy for that. On a more mindset interpretation of this, what's going on inside of us, this is really about getting clear around what situation or situationship potentially are we looking at through rose-colored glasses? What is something that's being shown to us that we keep saying, oh, they didn't mean that, or oh, maybe maybe it's not that. Where are we lying to ourselves? Where are we lying to ourselves, especially when it comes to relationships? When it comes to the relationship to ourselves, perhaps what is there something that we don't want to see about ourselves, or something that is difficult to admit about ourselves? And it doesn't, again, be very mindful of the judgment this week, because I think that this week has the potential to bring so much clarity that if we understand that there are some things that we are not doing that perhaps are going to help us move forward, The point isn't to beat yourself up because you haven't done that. It is to ask yourself, okay, how do I ease my way into that? How do I ask for help? What kind of research do I need to do? And actually take baby step actions. Remember, Mars is in Taurus, slow and steady. No one is rushing you to be anywhere. And so with this Venus square Neptune, it is about having deep compassion for whatever is coming up, especially about yourself or in a relationship. That's also an interpretation of a Venus Neptune connection. But having that that deep level of compassion doesn't imply being just passive, right? There is, because the nodes in Saturn are active all week, there is an element of, yes, of course, have compassion. Why else would you move through life with anything but that? And your ability to respond to something, your responsibility to your life only lies with you, okay? From a metaphysical perspective, this is a great weekend to do any kind of esoteric practices. So that which I mentioned earlier on in the video earlier in the week of writing that list of limiting thoughts that are roaming around your head and then burning it. This is a great weekend for that. We're talking about Neptune in Pisces. We're talking about not just the last degree of that sign, but the last degree of that zodiac. What thoughts, Gemini, what the relationship Venus to our thoughts, Gemini, how are we trying to dissolve that in order to enter a new space within ourselves? The weekend is so great for those kinds of practices because there is a connection to the divine. With Neptune and Pisces, there is an understanding, or at least an invitation to understand the connection to the divine. One thing you want to be kind of, again, aware of is that you are not just ignoring certain responsibilities, dissociating, because it's a really great weekend to just hang out, chill. Again, be around people that, calm your nervous system, not activated. Or if you're hanging out by yourself, have a great time, give yourself luscious things. And may that not be what you're doing to escape certain things that I think are going to become very clear earlier on in the week. So I think it's an interesting week. I personally love it. I'm looking forward to see what it brings me. I'm going to become more mindful in the videos to really interpret the practical, the mindset, and the metaphysical aspect, because we are whole beings and we're meant to work with each of the components of being in this 3D reality and understanding that we actually come from force and that from source, and that we are in fact limitless. How do we get in touch with that? How does the language of astrology actually help remind us of that in very practical ways? Okay. Thank you all so much once again for your likes, for your subscribes, for your comments. Comment. I love your comments. Thank you so much. One thing I'm really curious about is, where are y'all from? So let me know, put it down in the comments. I love to interact with you. For those of you who are interested in any readings, coaching, send me a DM on Instagram, send me an email, book a session with me for 30 minutes, like a Q&A call. If you have any questions around that. Also, for those of you who want horoscopes, I have the horoscopes on my Substack. Check it out. Much love to you all. I'll talk to you next week.